Well, welcome everyone to our 2020-2021 webinar series through the Chippewa River Writing Project. Tonight is a little bittersweet because this is our last webinar for the series, and we have a wonderful presenter with us, being that April is Poetry Month. We have Mr. Andy Schoenborn from Mount Pleasant High School. I know that I always look to Andy whenever I have poetry questions because he seems to be the poetry guru in our CRWP group. So I'm always willing to listen to what suggestions he has. Before we get started tonight, I just thought that we could take a moment, and maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not, but I would like to take a moment to just kind of have a moment of silence to recognize what has happened today and to acknowledge the fact that, despite the verdict that was handed down, our country still has a lot to go, a long ways to go before we can get where we need to be. And, but at least we have a start. And I'd just like to take a moment for that moment of silence to acknowledge what has gone on today. Thank you for that moment of silence. And I'm going to let Becky introduce herself. And then, Becky, you can hand it over to Andy.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you all for being here tonight on our last night. Thank you for spending a little bit of your evening with us. We've enjoyed having you throughout this entire series, no matter when you joined. I am Becky Schwartz. I am one of the co-facilitators of this webinar series, and I'm going to turn it over to the fantastic Andy Schoenborn, who is probably the most passionate human being about poetry I have ever met. He is an amazing educator. He is an amazing writer. It's a privilege to learn from him each and every time I get to spend any time with him at all. And I have often, maybe not always said it to him as much as I should have, but had I had him as my high school English teacher, I probably wouldn't have went into college as a freshman, absolutely hating poetry, and pray to God I never had to teach it. And so I don't know if that is the highest praise that I could give, but it's up there as far as what he deserves. So thank you, Andy. We're going to let you take it away here.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Thank you for that moment of silence, Jeremy. And thank you, Jeremy and Tracy and Becky and Troy and everyone for being here today. I am so thankful that we get to kind of finish the webinar thinking about poetry, especially that it is National Poetry Month. I have heard before that poetry isn't therapy, but poetry is therapeutic. And the reason why poetry is so near and dear to my heart is because I can honestly and vulnerably say that if it were not for poetry, I may not be here today. Poetry saved my life. Poetry gave me an outlet. Poetry gave me a voice. Poetry allowed me to express the things that I had inside of myself that I didn't know were there. And it even allowed me to express some of the things that I did know were there. Poetry is certainly a gift that we can share with everybody. And if it wasn't for Tom Romano about 15 years ago, acting as a keynote speaker for the Michigan Council of Teachers of English, who nervously got up and began his keynote by sharing a poem, I probably wouldn't have been into it quite as much this way, because I think it's kind of scary to talk about poetry, to be honest, but it's also exhilarating. And that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about here tonight, is the exhilaration that we can have, the social emotional learning impact that we can have with our students, how we can make poetry something that doesn't have to be scary with a bunch of structures and rules, and how we can invite poetry into our classrooms literally every single day, and find ways to impact our students that we have all over this nation and all over the world. So just as a friendly reminder, I'm sure everyone's been doing this. If you would like to have this slide deck, you can type in the bit.ly, or you can take a picture of the QR code up in there. Everything that you'll see in this presentation is on here. You'll see them linked into images and different places like that as well. I guess it's because of writing project stuff, but I've been doing this in my classes quite a bit lately. So we're going to take just a little bit of time here to do a little bit of writing. So if you happen to have your writer's notebook, I have mine right here. I'm going to be doing this right along with you. This is a quote that comes from Poem Teachers by Amy Ludwig van der Water. She is a champion of poetry as well, specifically in the elementary grades. But I found her work has meaning not only in my classroom, in my AP Lit classes, but also in my general education classes in high schools, in my high school as well. So think about this. Poems wake us up, keep us company, and remind us that our world is big and small. And two, poems teach us how to write anything. Let's take just 2 minutes. I'd like you just to respond to that any way that you feel like you want to respond. Take another 15 seconds or so. Meant to be a very quick, kind of quick write. And if you choose to share, I'd be curious to hear from a few people who might want to share how they responded back with that. Of course, I'll be sharing as well. You may want to put something in the chat, but you hear me saying if you choose, you hear me saying you may want to. That's not something you have to feel obligated to. I'm often reminded of Nancy Atwell when it comes to poetry, and she says that poetry is the grandmother of all genres. So when I think about that and where that comes from, our feelings about what poetry might be, our experiences about what it might be, can be vast and different. But I know for me that the words allow us to play, explore, express, feel, and somewhat feel more connected to the world with the words that we have. And I love what Annette had to say. In a world full of societal rules, enter the world of poetry where there are none. Yeah, I'm going to give snaps on that one. Very good. I'm kind of a snap guy here. That's how we celebrate the words in my classes as well.
Andy, I'd like to take a moment just to share what I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote that poetry was a huge part of my life from grades 3 through 5. I was in a poetry club that my third grade teacher hosted after school, and I was a part of it for all 3 years. I still keep in touch with my third grade teacher today on Facebook. And as Andy said, it was my outlet. Unfortunately, I lost touch with poetry because teachers just never had it within their curriculum going on to middle school and high school until the Summer Institute in 2010 when I was reintroduced to it. And I now read a poem every day to my middle school students.
Snaps for me, of course. Nadia has something to share. Nadia, please.
Sure, I'll turn on my video too.
Yeah.
So when the pandemic started, I'm still in college. I go to CMU.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a poetry class, and that was the transition course when we went online. So it was really interesting to see how it went from focusing on poetry that was written before the pandemic to focusing on poetry coming out during the pandemic, and seeing that shift in emotion in such a real way, and seeing the shift in my own writing too. So that's kind of where poetry kind of stuck with me, is now it's something that I read a poem every day. But it's raw emotion. That's really what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you had said that, talked about the emotional connection. Part of what we're doing here is using poetry to reach across distances. And we're at lots of different distances here right now. And if we can reach people from emotional states, those are always good places to be. Because if you're listening to the people who are talking about their teachers that they had, where poetry came up, usually there's some kind of an emotional attachment to that, some kind of an effective way. And I think that's a really great place. Wonderful. I'm just checking the chat. I think Jan, thank you. She writes, write anything as we navigate some 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, write anything. What comes up? What's there that we did not know was there? Yeah, I think that's a great way. And we never know what's going to bubble up. I never know. And we're going to be experiencing some of that today too, which I think is really, really fantastic. Awesome, Angela. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Angela said that she has begun sharing a poem a day too. And hopefully you're recognizing some of the power that poetry has, especially since we don't necessarily do anything with it other than appreciate that the poem was there for the day. I'm going to share with you something that was shared with me just a few weeks ago. I am in a teacher writers group with Ethical ELA. You'll hear me talking about that later in this presentation. And they are running actually, Dr. Sarah Donovan's been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. But every April, she has a hashtag Verse Love, in which she invites teacher writers from around the nation to come in and not only write poetry, but also share poetry prompts and different ways to connect through these words. And this is one of the pieces that came out that I really appreciated and one that I really liked. It's called Spark Lines. You might have heard this and you may not have heard of it. That's okay. We're going to listen to a poem titled Elementary by G. Yamazawa. And as you listen to his words, some words are going to strike some kind of a chord with you. Some words are going to resonate. I want you to pay attention to the words that have some kind of a spark for you. It might be an individual word. It might be a phrase. Maybe you're fast enough that you can catch a whole line. But as you listen, just write down words that seem to create some kind of a spark with you. And while you're doing that, also enjoy Elementary by G. Yamazawa. Yes, you can have a snack.
I was so young, I don't even remember how old I was the first time I called someone gay. But it had to have been elementary school. See, one day, my dad was picking me up, and right before we pulled out of the parking lot, a girl waved at us with a smile like a vine. Even though she was the orchard that everyone picked on, she was still sweet and loved to be alive. When my dad asked me why I didn't wave back, I told him it was because she was gay. He looked at me with one of those religious stares. And every bit of Buddhism in his brow raised the question, what does that even mean? We all crack under peer pressure. But once you see that their earthquakes are coming from your faults, you realize how deep trembles are felt. Beneath the surface, where things are left and forgotten. See, this was before poetry became my world. I noticed that words have gravity. I've seen them crush people. From a first-person perspective, I felt a phrase fall out of my mouth like an atom bomb without knowing the effects will radiate for years. I've loved a language that hates people, cracking jokes trying to shatter their mirrors just because I wasn't confident in my own reflection. I hated myself for the shape of my eyes, so I became a bully because we all want to feel like America sometimes, and we all want straight spines. And we all want straight spines to stand for something we believe in, but it's funny how flags and people have the same knack for politely waving at the ones they have forgotten. See, as early as elementary school, my parents planted a seed, and the lotus of Buddhism began to blossom in my brain. We had a pond in the backyard, and the flat water taught me of equality, that life is the one thing we all share. I was also taught how to pray. I've been memorizing mantras and chanting sutras out loud before the Pledge of Allegiance ever molested my lips. I was taught of cause and effect, how it is the ultimate truth that everything relies on, how a thought will turn to word as quickly as fuel becomes fire, whether it's for burning down a house or for keeping a lover warm. The spark of an idea will always match the fuming language we decide to pour out of our mouths, but I forgot that the voice does the work of the Buddha, so why would I ever call someone gay before calling them beautiful? Why would I not praise the person that drinks the same water as me? Why would I lift my voice just to put someone else down? You see, us humans, we have a habit of overpowering and taking what doesn't belong to us. But I pray that we are making our way towards the moment when our tongues are the only thing left for us to conquer. And if there's one thing that I've learned about being a poet, it's that it's not about what you have to say in your poem. It's about what you have to say when your poem is done.
Mm. With spark lines, hopefully you have, I know I have about 8 different lines, words, phrases, different things that kind of resonated with me very personally through listening to G. Yamazawa's words. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, take a line or two, maybe you just take a word, and I'd like you to run with it. Let's take 4 minutes and just write. 4 minutes just to write and run with it. We're not all going to have a chance to share. There might be some people who would like to share a little bit, but you don't have to at all. So 4 minutes, please find a spark line and let it burn. Welcome back, writers. Wherever you might be at the end of your lines, maybe you finish mid-sentence. That's a perfect place to stop too. It doesn't really matter too much. I'll share something that I have. We're not going to go around and hear from everybody, but if you have a particular line that kind of came out of that and you'd like to put it into the chat, we'd love to hear what you have. Love to see what you have when it comes to that too. Remember, we're practicing connection here. We're practicing working on being remote and yet still feeling close to one another. Even in a short space of time, I believe that we can do that. The line that I decided to pull from G. Yamazawa's words were, "My parents planted the seed." And I wrote, "My parents planted the seed that let me see beyond their aging proximial views. They told me to love everyone. So I did, so I do. Even while in their aging years, they have become hardened to the narrow perspective that doesn't benefit anyone but themselves." I guess a step should you choose to. Okay. Annette writes that she gravitated to the line that included "smile like a vine." I did too. Actually, I wrote that first, Annette. I think it's really fantastic. I loved that idea. It's not about what you say in the poem, but what you say when the poem is done. Yes, when it's over, whatever that might be. Thank you. Yeah, talking about, Jeremy writes, "before it even molested my lips," talking about the national anthem. Boy, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. Thank you. Anna writes, "Words have weight. We don't feel that heaviness until they land upon someone else." Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Annette, you're going to share. Please do. I'd love to hear your words.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. My smile can be contagious. I've tested this before. Smiled at every face I gazed upon in a day. Smiled till my cheeks ached with a tingling joy. I was convinced that my smile would be like a vine weaving through the orchard, tickling the seeds of happiness to grow and grow and grow. That's where I stopped.
Awesome. I loved how you chose the line, but then you wove it, no pun intended, with the vine idea, but you wove it kind of right in the near the end of it. That's also wonderful. We don't always have to have that right at the beginning. Thank you so much for being brave and sharing in that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Jen writes, "Preciousness of life blooming before our eyes, a smile on a vine, a lotus of words." I love that. "Rippling in a pond, spark appreciation of all that lives." Thank you. Yes, the flags waving by people. Thanks, Becky. "Tongues are the only thing left to conquer," Troy writes. Thank you, Troy. "The fuming language," yes, and what it can ignite, I think is interesting. Wonderful. "Words are like fire. Their fumes and fragrance linger long after the flames are extinguished. Words can roll across the surface of the mind like roaring wildfire on the plains, but in their wake they leave enriched earth and fertile soil to grow the seeds of ideas." Oh, so awesome. Yes, and we'll have one more person share because I want to share some other ways that we can bring these things into our classrooms. But Kara, please share.
Thank you. So I was really kind of inspired by the line, "I've been memorizing mantras and chanting sutras out loud before the Pledge of Allegiance ever molested my lips." And I just started thinking about Floyd with the words sutras and mantras. So I wrote, "George Floyd was karmically the instrument of this paradigm shift. His dharma was the spark that set off this movement. We need to become more conscious of what is possible to redefine how we can all exist together to break barriers. This is where the journey starts."
Yes, absolutely. Evie has snaps too, of course. So wonderful. And it's interesting too how we can take the current events that we hear around us, get inspiration from the poetry and the words as well, and find a way to enter into and maybe even make a little bit of sense out of something.
And also, I'm trying to get my dog
Thank
because
you.
I let him upstairs on accident.
Thank you. Yes, she let the dog upstairs on accident.
Where are you?
Okay. So one thing that's really wonderful about poetry is, especially for our students, it allows us in that process to be with yourself for a moment and also to be yourself for a moment. I ask students to share from time to time, but not all the time. And the reason for that is, sometimes being present with yourself doesn't necessarily mean you have to share. And I like this idea too that Sophia Thakur talks about, that is, be in airplane mode, everything but yourself for a moment. Just to click it all off and just tune into what it is that you're listening to through poems. Yes, please. To do this, though, I think part of the trouble when it comes to poetry is teachers have a tendency to want to hold on to it too much, to try to put strengths and constraints on it too much, to give deadlines and dates and have restrictions on what this poem should be or what students should be writing and how they should be thinking. And I think that the spark of creativity doesn't really work that way too well. And I think Judy Soren Brown from The Sea Escapes All Rivers gives us an idea of what we can do as teachers to find that spark of creativity and to really use it so that students can actually see them for who they really are and see themselves as poets. Students tell me all the time that they're not poets, they hate poetry. That changes over the course of time, mainly because they're allowed to appreciate the things that they hear. That spark can be turned into a fire. And what makes a fire burn is the space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is the fuel and the absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. I don't know about your lesson plans, but when I think about everything that I'm supposed to do with my students and all the standards I'm supposed to have my students meet and all the deadlines I'm supposed to have my students reach, and I'm supposed to teach from bell to bell the entire time, we can pack things in so tightly in our students' schedules that even if they have a spark, we can douse it just by packing those things in too tight. And I think it's important, especially in an English classroom, but I would say in any classroom, that we purposely create spaces between the logs, so to speak. If the logs are the different assignments and the different units and the different books read, how can we place those spaces so we can allow students to have that spark that burns for them? And this is one way that I've thought of and have written a little bit about how we can create spaces for poetry. This is sort of what my typical weekly schedule looks like. Of course, things change, and yes, it's malleable. And most times we get the poetry in there. I would say about 99% of the time we do. Sometimes things happen. So as you can see, every day begins with a poem. On Monday, I invite spoken word poetries in. By invite, I mean go to YouTube and find spoken word poets that I think can walk us in and welcome us into the day. Tuesday through Thursday, I usually have poetry that we're working with right now. I'm working with, I have it right here, Why Storms Are Named After People and Bullets Remain Nameless by Tanaya Winder. We don't read all the poems. I pick and choose some of them, but I found that students tend to like hearing from the voice of one person for a few weeks, and then the next week another person. And that gives me a chance to welcome in lots of different types of voices into the room. And then on Friday, especially after we get about 6 weeks in, I teach in trimesters. So you could say about the halfway point of a semester, a trimester. Students share the work that they have, and this work that they share is really quite amazing. That I ask some students, I invite them to be our featured poet on Friday. So we'll hear from students in classes that we have, and then I teach, invite them to share, invite them to say a little bit about what they have, share their words from the author, and also share revision decisions as they go. And this, I get a lot of my spoken word poetry from Button Poetry. You can click on the image here for some classroom friendly poems. And my featured poets, say click on this really quickly. I kind of encapsulate these here because I don't want these to get lost. So these are the most recent poems that students have been invited to share, just one student per week. And you can see it's kind of grown over time. We have lots and lots of poets who are willing to share. Some poets even choose to bring on their own artwork, which I think is just wonderful. So when you look at this, as students share, and they're each sharing their own blogs, they have a title, of course, and then a high definition image that goes with it. They have their poem, which, you know, I think the poem itself, I'm not going to be too worried about it. Does it look publishable? And that's what I want from my students. In this case, too, I have to pay attention to students' words. So when I first looked at this piece, I had asked Emma if she minded if we talk about the piece a little bit, because I don't know about you, but I'm not noticing any punctuation. And then after we talked, she told me that that was a purposeful choice and had good reasoning and understanding behind why she had made those choices, because she wanted it to continue to sound as though it was all kind of a bunch of talk at once instead of each individual pieces. So hearing that and understanding where she's coming from, she put good, purposeful, intentional thought in not having punctuation. Now, I'll have students say things like, well, I just like it the way that it is. But if they can't really describe to me why they're making those choices, then I think that becomes a little bit of a different conversation. In the end, I'm not so worried about grading their words. I'm asking people to write with their soul. I'm asking them to write with their heart. I'm asking them to be vulnerable. How do you give that kind of an ask anything less than an A? But I also want these pieces to look presentable. So, and I also want to learn a little bit from them too, and have people learn from them too. So they share words from the author section in which they talk about why it is that they had the inspiration for it. One of the examples that I use is, we might really love Elton John's music, or we might really love the music of Queen, but we also are really drawn to Rocket Man, or we're drawn to Bohemian Rhapsody, which are kind of epic biopics where we can kind of understand how those artists become who they were, not only to us in our lives, but also in their own lives. And being able to understand from the writer the words that they have to share about the meaning behind this poem becomes an interesting exploration for students. Also hearing one revision decision that they've made. They don't need to talk about all the changes, but what was the most important and impactful, the most significant thing that they did within that piece that changed it up just a little bit? Maybe had them re-envision what it is that they were doing. Over the course of that week too, I do include independent reading Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but I wanted to create space for independent writing. I think that reading choice books and diverse texts do make readers, but I also think writing makes diverse writers as well, and makes students connect with writing better too. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, those become our independent writing days. You can see in my 72 class minute periods, this is usually kind of the template that I follow. Sometimes it changes, but I try to get in as much writing as I can, or make space for it when we can. If I were teaching in a 52-minute class period, I might only have 10 minutes of reading and writing. Maybe I have only 8, but it's not so much, the time of course is important, but what's more important to me is that we've taken the time, because I think the greatest gift that we can give our students is time and space for them to work on what it is that we're asking them to work on. Some students might spend time with reading and writing, but they may not unless we give them that time in class and in school itself. This turns itself into something that's really a regular writing routine. And like I said, in trimesters, I have 12 weeks that I teach in. So if you had 16 weeks, you might separate this a little bit differently. But we bring our publishable pieces together for creative writing, along with the reading analysis and growth territories. And those publishable choice pieces of writing is where I'm able to read a little bit more about what it is that students are writing about. Oftentimes, they write poetry. It's not a requirement that they write poetry. I tell them I don't care what they write. I tell them I just care that they write. And I mean that. But I would like them to have something come to a completed piece. And poetry lends itself a little bit easier to that sometimes. There can be rules, but there don't have to be rules. You're still making purposeful decisions along the way. They can feel as though they have accomplished things. There's plenty of time in class for us to do larger pieces of writing as well. And some students do that too. But I find that students have a tendency to lean more toward poetry itself. And then as we revise and polish and publish, we borrowed this from Robert Fanning, who is a resident poet from Central Michigan University, where he asks us to sift for gold. It helps students to figure out the revising or the re-envisioning. We put stars or smiley faces next to some of our favorite spots. We think of the things that we can delete and change, the things that we can move. And then you can see the requirements that I have over here for HD mentor texts, revise and edits, words from the author and revision decision. And I also share student models as well, which of course on LiveWrite, they have lots and lots of models on there. That becomes one way that we can connect. And as you can see with the students in the picture, as she's working on one of her poems, they get help from each other sometimes too. When we hear each other's words, we bring those words in. So in the writing workshop really kind of creates that space that we need as well. But we also share. And, you know, when it comes to sharing, I think, especially with writing, if you're not doing it with your students, I think that you're not necessarily doing it right. Because if you're going to ask your students to be vulnerable, you better darn be willing to be vulnerable with them as well. So I share work with them. In the first 6 weeks, actually, since they're doing their writing and we don't have student featured poets because I haven't seen their words yet, I share words that I've written and they get to hear a little bit about me. We also get to find out how to write these pieces themselves. And this is a piece that I'm going to share with you too. It's titled Exit 131, and it's about me. It's about me in high school. In fact, that guy right there in the tuxedo is me right before I went to pick up my date for prom my senior year. My gosh. If I saw that guy coming to my daughter, I don't know if I would trust him. I'd be pretty nervous, but it's a picture of me right here. And this is Exit 131. If those of you are from Michigan, you might be familiar with traveling north on I-75 from Detroit. Exit 131 is the exit at Clio. That's the exit where M57 and 131 meet. And I grew up and graduated from Ithaca, Michigan, which is a very rural area in Michigan. But I would always take M57 east to Clio, which is exit 131, head down to Detroit, where we would spend time together with friends, going to concerts and different things like that too. And so this is what I wrote a little bit about that. 1994 was many things for me. Lollapalooza with the Beasties, who were smashing pumpkins with George Clinton, and a certain Tribe Called Quest. 1994 was a mosh pit memory and a black eye I wore like a badge of honor, forever on display, hanging on National Honor Society walls of Ithaca High School. 1994 brought me my very first real love, an auburn-haired alternatine beauty whose love for the Beatles was equal to her love of bare naked ladies. In those days, it felt like we were born on a pirate ship as we sang along to If I Had $1 Million, where we'd be rich and still eat Kraft dinner. We were pushed and pulled by waves of alternative fuzz crackling through blown out speakers. We smoked cigarettes and laughed in our resale shop flannel. In 1994, we wore the tires of a broken down Festiva thin, riding the black ribbon of M57 East as though we were on a tightrope daring life to pull us down. We sought the shelter of St. Andrews, Meadowbrook, the Pine Knob, and the Palace as they pulled us through the fading moments of our adolescent lives. In a fading Detroit, the sun cast shadows of steel longer than our dreams. We always left in darkness, eyes heavy with sleep, exhausted from using up the remnants of our naive irresponsibility. In the quiet of the night, while friends slept, I drove north on I-75. There was one sign that comforted me as I traveled from the known world into the unknown. Hands loosely on the wheel, I waited for the melancholic face of Jesus on a billboard yellowed with age, whom eternally asked, "Are you on the right road?" Man, I don't know, Jesus, but I sure am enjoying the ride. White stripes on the highway blur on my left and disappear in the darkness. I don't look back. My vision reached only as far as dim headlights could lift the night. In 1994, I took exit 131 in the last moments of my youth and headed west. A beat up Festiva cradled friends as we sped toward adulthood in the dead of night. No clear vision of the future. Then I share revision decisions and words from the authors with my students. But more than just sharing with students those poems, I also want them to hear 2 words from students who were right there in the classroom with us, because the vulnerabilities that we share and the bravery that we show by sharing our words and lifting them up and writing with and beside our students can create some very unexpected things. This is a piece by Kennedy Griffin, who has since graduated a few years ago, but she writes something that is still timely today in her work, Everything But Us. Kennedy writes, "They love our head wraps, the way the do-rags, elegant colors and prints curve and caress their way around our hair. They love our hair, the way our kinks, curls, and coils frame our elegant faces with such pride. They love our faces, the way the chocolate melts into our eyes and drips down along our arms and stomachs. They love our food, the way the lingering taste of Creole and soul food makes their skin seize with satisfaction. They love our skin. Sun-kissed is never the right word, they say. Infatuated with how the melanin encases our muscles and tendons and smiles. They love the sound of us, the way our words and notes curl around the saxophones and double bass. So why is it that these people who claim to love everything about us seem to love everything about us but us?" About a month after Kennedy wrote that piece, she graduated from high school, went on to become a Marine, and has been serving our country since. So I still stay in touch with Kennedy every once in a while, and I'm very glad that she's not only sharing those words, but sharing with us as well. When I first started bringing poetry into my classroom, I didn't really know where to look. So I always kind of focused on the authors that I sort of knew really well. But then I began to expand the authors that I bring into my classroom, not only because I wanted to hear different perspectives. I wanted my students to be able to see themselves, hear themselves, and know that they're seen within the walls of the classroom that we're in. Yes, I teach in a rural area, but the diversity that I have in my classroom is really still there. And even if it wasn't there, in some classes that I do teach in, I have all white students. It's really useful for them to hear that, the ideas that Michael Bornier has to say match my feelings. When G. Yamazawa speaks, I understand those perspectives. Those are my perspectives too. When Jose Olivares speaks, I know he's listening to me. And of course, Sophia Thakur, her words speak right to my heart. So these are just 8 poets. But these are poets, and if you click on the links to their names, you'll go right to their websites, and you can find lots of different things from them. Of course, like any poet, some of their work is going to be more suitable for the classroom than others. But what I do know is their work speaks to the hearts and the minds of adolescents. They also speak to the hearts and minds of you and me and adults. And I encourage you, some of these names you're familiar with, but I encourage you to not only seek out their websites, but check out their books. Look for the ways that you might be able to bring some of these words into your classrooms. So I think maybe I'll stop for just a minute because I've been talking kind of quickly, but I want to create some space for us to answer questions at the end. But I'm going to look at the chat. And I also ask people to open up the mic. Is there anything that people have on mind that they might want to share and bring up? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep, Ithaca, St. Charles, not too far away. Very cool.
I'll interject with a logistical question from a little
Yeah.
earlier. Annette had asked, right when you were talking about your trimesters and schedules, do you get new students for every trimester, Andy?
It depends. So if I would say about 70% of the time I get new students every trimester. So, but sometimes too, I teach in a small enough district that I'll sometimes teach sophomores for a year, and then I'll have juniors for a year, and then seniors. So sometimes my new students might only be half the class is new, but everyone is pretty familiar with having poetry every day. Everyone's pretty familiar with writing every day, and I try to keep updated on the words that bring in the classroom. Just, I don't know, I love poetry, so it's always fun. It's not a chore for me to kind of do that. I think that answers the question pretty well. Okay, cool. We're going to try to find that poet within you. I know Jeremy has that poet within him. He shared that just a little bit too. So take out your writer's notebooks again, if you'll do that with us, with me. And we're going to go through a very quick kind of a series of writing, kind of quick write ideas. We're going to go very quickly, and then we're going to take some of those ideas and try to turn it into something else. It'll work a little bit like this. I'm going to share a topic, some overarching idea, and I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds. So when you see this topic on your notebook, just write down 2 or 3 things, maybe 4, you can get quick enough, that just immediately come to mind. Ready? Here we go. Songs. What are names of songs? Look through a window. What do you see when you look through that window? If you don't have one, imagine, look through the window of your mind. What do you see? Write down all the things you see. Be as specific as possible. Think of an item of significance. Item of significance. Be as specific as possible. What's your worst hairstyle? The hairstyle that you hated the most? Think back. What's your favorite clothing style or look? When did you ever look the best? Whatever that was. Favorite clothing style or look? Share an elementary age memory. Middle school aged memory. High school aged memory. Okay, so now you have a list and a series of different kinds of things. They're all sort of things that are significant to you for one way or another, or things that you've noticed, but they're all things that you've chosen. What I would like you to do is when you look through that list of things that you have, see if you can find 1, 2, maybe there's 3 different things that you would like to write about. When you write about these things, start first with sensory details. So, for example, as much as I don't want to admit this, I'm going to share this here. When I think of an elementary age memory, it blows my mind to think that I was 10 years old when I was looking for used cigarettes out by a local grocery store so that my friends and I could practice smoking them, just like we saw our parents doing. Vivid kind of things like that are pretty interesting. So when you choose something that you want to write about, start with some sensory details. How did that smell? I can smell the stale, lingering smoke. I could hear the sounds of adults saying, "Hey kid, you probably shouldn't be doing that." I remember the taste of dirt on my lips when I was doing that, and the sights of other kids looking at us with disgust. I remember the touch of the filter on the cigarette as it felt large in my small fingers. And then also consider too, who are the characters with you in this scene? I had my two friends who we all encouraged each other to do this. Ronnie and Lee were their names. And of course, they were in cahoots with me. So we'll take about 3 minutes. Find something there you might want to talk about, write about. Start with sensory details, and we'll write for about 3 minutes here. Welcome back, writers. Please find a spot where you can stop in your writing. Maybe you got something. I got a little bit of something about a page. So it's amazing kind of what can happen. Of course, it's no competition, but when you bring yourself to those spaces and those places, those memories that you have, whatever they may be, and you think about sensory details, that really helps to focus in on specific moments and makes writing a little bit more personal, helps make it a little more vulnerable between and with people. I don't think we have time to share out loud right now, but if you have something, a line or two that really came up that you liked, if you would put that in the chat, that would be a fantastic place to put that. I have a few more things I'd like to share with you before I open up the rest of our time with questions. These are some of the invitations that I have for you to do writing. So if you've heard of Rattle, you may have, there's a monthly ekphrastic poem challenge where you can write to a specific image. You can have your students do the same, encourage your students to send their words into the poem challenge where you can actually win real money. This is not one of those fake kind of places that like you send your poem in and you pay your $20 and then maybe you win. No, this is a place that actually is an authentic space for writers to share their words. Ethical ELA, Sarah Donovan's work with hashtag VerseLove. If you were to click on that link, that's a good space for teacher writers to go. It's not really, it can be a space for students, but it's more a space with trusted teacher writers, adults, where you can hone in on your writing of poetry and really pay attention to how each other responds to one another. In that response has really taught me a lot about how to give feedback back to students and really to each other when it comes to writing poetry. Go Poems by Brett Vogelsinger is also a great place. These are poems we can find lots and lots of places. They're meant to be used in the classroom. They're put together by different types of poet teachers throughout the nation, and they're literally what it says. You can pick it up and you can go with it and you can use that right away. So you don't need to scour around for prompts. Because they're put together by teachers as well, it's also with a mind towards process and practice and not just a mind toward just some type of a prompt without any real connection. So those are three great places. You can just simply click on the images from this and they'll take you right to it. I want to share this piece by Georgia Hurd as well, and by Namakula. And I think especially today it makes good sense. We are all human. We are all unique. We are all valuable. We are all vulnerable. Love one another. We are connected. And Georgia Hurd's Star Stuff goes along with that.
A boy once told me, "We are made of star stuff." I imagined bits of shine broken off from stars inside us. He meant we are made of divine ingredients. Calcium in our teeth. Iron in our blood. Every atom in our bodies crafted in the kiln of long dead stars. You, me, those we've never met, might never know. In cities and towns we've only read the names of. Kids playing soccer barefoot in the streets of Rio. A girl riding her bike to school in Accra. Even the boy in Orion, Alabama. Gazing up at the spattered canvas of night. All of us platted together by stars. On starry nights. Mothers, fathers, friends we've lost, wink at us. We are made of stars. We dazzle.
You know, I think when our students encounter poetry, we can find that, more in common with one another than what we think. And many of you might see too, and I wear this shirt quite often, probably at least once a week, but I have a shirt that says Poetic Justice. And Poetic Justice is not just that movie that you've heard about perhaps from the mid-90s, but it is also a program that encourages power to change the lives of women who are in prison as they learn to write poetry, to express themselves. And so if you would be interested in, and I would encourage you to check out Poetic Justice. And if you want a shirt like mine, it's $20, but a donation also goes directly to help incarcerated women learn to find hope and have the power to change their lives through poetry and through written word itself. It's a beautiful place where you can give back in places where many times these incarcerated women don't feel like they have any way sort of out. So just to finish, I would like to say the language is a celebration of literacy, life, and the experience when we are all vulnerable enough to perceive it as such. This is a little bit about me, my information, but I'm going to stop here and see if there are any other questions, comments, or anything else that I can do to clarify how I help reach students through digital screens and bring poetry into their lives and make emotional connections. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Lori. We have so many kind people, Troy and Becky and Jeremy
Yes.
and Casey, everybody who just joins here. I just am so grateful every time.
Yes, definitely.
I'll just say my quick thank you to Andy. And if any of you would like to spend more time with Andy and learning with and from him, as well as other CRWP teacher leaders this summer, I'm going to put a link to the Summer Institute. We still have a scholarship opportunity open and available. And I know many of you in the room tonight have been part of that in the past. And we would also welcome new friends and colleagues to join us as well. And with that, I also want to just give a special shout out and thanks at the end of the webinar series to Jeremy and Becky, who do a whole lot behind the scenes to manage all of this. And also a special thanks to Tracy, who stepped in when we were having continued Zoom and WebEx problems and hosted these final 2 webinars in her Zoom room. So with that, I'll be quiet again and turn it back to Jeremy and to Becky.
I was just going to say thank you so much for all of this, Andy. I'm like vigorously copying down notes. I think I filled the entire page of Google Docs tonight between poetry and just taking notes, and going to go back and use some of that stuff definitely for my students in the future. So thank you very much. And just thanking everybody for being here tonight. And hopefully we can all take another deep breath before we go to bed tonight, and maybe all of us can sleep just a little bit easier, knowing that the world can breathe a little bit easier tonight. And with that, we have poetry to help us, so which is awesome. So Becky, any last words?
As always, when we end every one of these webinars, maybe I don't say it enough, but my heart is full. My cup is full. Thank you, Andy, for an amazing session tonight that I think everybody needed, and the activity that you did at the end with finding your own. So thank you for that. That's an activity that anybody could take into their classroom like tomorrow and roll out with kids or themselves, just to kind of chisel away a little bit of writing time for themselves. So and again, thank you all for coming, and thank you to everybody who's presented this year. This has been a great series, and we've really enjoyed it. So thank you. All of your work is appreciated. Keep kicking butt. This has been a tough year, so thank you for continuing to make this to make your practice continue to show that love for that practice in a year where it feels like it's impossible. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Night, guys.